O senseless cares of mortals, how deceiving are syllogistic reasonings that bring you wings to flight so low, to earthly things. One studied law, and one the aphorisms of the physicians. One was set on priesthood, and one, through force or fraud, on rulership. One meant to plunder, one to politic. One labored, tangled in delights of flesh, and one was fully bent on indolence, while I, delivered from our servitude to all these things, was in the height of heaven with Beatrice, so gloriously welcomed. Hey everyone, that was Dante's Divine Comedy, and I'm Lara Paquette here to give you 10 writer's takeaways from the Divine Comedy. The first thing you're going to notice is the control of language, and there's two things that are at play here. One is that he's kind of inventing his own scheme, the tercet, and that's going to be an ABA, BCB type scheme. And on the one hand, it's very, very restrictive, very precise, but because he's making it up, there's a lot of freedom in it. He's kind of just playing and going along. The second thing you want to notice is that, well, you can't really notice it because I'm reading in English, but he's writing in Italian. And at this point in time, all the scholars, everyone who's academic or important, they're all writing in Latin. So he's writing specifically for the people. But at the same time, he's drawing on mythology, theology, history, and so he's not dumbing himself down for the people. Instead, he's bringing all this academic realm down to the everyday person. Within that control of language, he's got internal rhyme, he's got assonance, consonants, all these things that we don't typically think about doing as novelists, and there's a good reason for it. It sounds awkward, it kind of draws too much attention, it can come across as pretentious or purple prose, but there's still a lot we can learn from it. Dante is paying very close attention to the words and to the sentences. And for the words, I think everyone knows you want to pick the right words, say what you mean, but also pay attention to the sound. So you have a word like squelch versus a word like crush or stifle. And technically speaking, those words mean pretty much the same thing. If you look them up in the thesaurus, they're going to be on the same page. But they have such different connotations based on how they sound. Squelch is something you're going to find in Joe Abercrombie, whereas a word like press is going to be something more romantic, something like, I can't think of anything romantic off the top of my head, but something maybe like Tolkien or someone that's writing a more glorified romantic type work. Then you've also got the sentence level, and he's basically working at the clause and at the sentence. Your punctuation and that variance, that all matters. That's how you control the flow of your work and how someone reads. You control the pace through your sentences, and it's just something you want to pay attention to. Number 2, be willing to say something. So Dante is talking about the sovereignty of God, he's talking about the free will of man, he's talking about the bounds of man's perception, he's putting popes in hell in a time when everyone is Catholic, or everyone he knows anyway is Catholic. And this is something that we're not really comfortable with as moderns, and there's a good reason for that. I mean, we don't know where Dante's right and where he's wrong, and there's really no way of knowing for sure, at least right here where we are now. But there's also a danger, I'm looking at Marvel or something like that, of saying something, but saying it just to be cool, saying it flippantly, and then instantly undercutting it with a joke. One, if you do that every single time, it's no longer funny, because even if we don't know what you're going to say, we have that timing down. And so, half of comedy isn't just what you say, but it's the placement, the comedic timing, and you've just ruined it because it's every single time. Secondly, because it's not adding comedy, all it's doing is slowing down your fight scene. People like fight scenes. I will read a book just for the fight scenes. So just don't slow it down if you're always making these jokes. Once or twice, that's fine. There's a stylistic choice. But otherwise, you're just calling attention to your insecurities, and don't do that. Just finish the fight scene, write a good fight scene, and people will enjoy it. 3 is you don't need to explain everything. There's a couple of times where Dante will ask Beatrice or Virgil a question, and their answer basically comes down to, that's because God is just, or God is good. But that's not just, a theological out that you can have. Even with someone like H.G. Wells, who's living in a time when all the intellectuals are basically Marxists, fascists, or Catholics. He picks Marx, and he gets man to the moon by basically a ball of magic. How do we float up there? There's this new meadow we found that does whatever it is the plot needs it to do. That's great. That is all we need to know. Man is on the moon. Let the story begin. But there are some things that add to the tension. I'm thinking here of Kindred by Octavia Butler. And in Kindred, a woman is traveling back into time, and whether or not she goes is dependent on whether her ancestor is in danger or not. So, because she's a black woman going back to the South in a time where you don't want to be in the South if you're a black woman, we have that tension, we have that fear. Is he in trouble? Is her ancestor in trouble? We don't care about him. He's crappy. But we care about her, first of all, existing, and second of all, not dying in the present. But we don't know how that portal scientifically works, and that is fine. We don't need it. Knowing how the portal is activated, that adds to the story. That increases the tension. Knowing how it works, nobody cares. That doesn't matter. So just go with whatever the story needs to increase the tension. Then, fourthly, is personal significance within the epic scale. And it's been said a lot in a lot of different ways that, if you want to write about the horrors of war, you don't write about, oh no, think about the children. You write about a lost doll or something like that. But I think Dante goes a step further, and that he's not just showing what's happening, he's not just showing what is or the absence, what should be there but isn't. He's looking at people and he's letting them tell their own story. And that doesn't mean that the narrative is agreeing with whatever they say. There are a few times when someone says, oh, I don't deserve this, blah, 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 but you can tell by how they talk, or by how Virgil reacts, or just the narrative judgment itself, yeah, buddy, you do. But at the same time, getting to hear their story in their own words brings that character and that situation to life. So, number 5 is going to be repetition. So, on the one hand, this is how said is not dead. There are some words that you just need for a story. If said is the best verb, and it probably is if someone is talking, just go with said. Or if you're talking about an object that is common, something like eyes, you're not going to describe eyes as glowing orbs or balls or globes or something. Just say eyes. But then besides this word level, there's also the image level, the sentence level, or the phrase. If you have this repetition in an object or a piece of dialogue, it creates this sense of building. So at the end of the Inferno, the Purgatorio, and the Paradiso, on each one, even in translation, the last word is stars. And it means something a little bit different each time, but to have that image creates this sense of building, and then at the very end, it creates this sense of closure and completion. So then number 6, you have history. And that's really easy for Dante because he's drawing on literal history, Justinian, Charles Martel, as well as mythological figures which have existed for centuries by the time he's writing, actually millennia by the time he's writing. And it's really hard for us to do fast, right? But the characters have history by the time they get on the page, and you don't need to tell everything that's happened before. But you should at least know, and write them in such a way that the astute reader is going to kind of pick up on it, and even the more casual reader is just going to enjoy a more fleshed out character. And then as you're going along in the story, they're gaining history. These little interactions should matter, and now characters are going to see each other in different lights. There's a sense of change and a continuation as you tell the story. One note to kind of get history quickly is by using archetypes. And especially when I was younger, I really didn't like this idea because it felt restricting. And if you just have a paper cutout of an archetype, yeah, that nobody wants to read that. But by considering the essential nature of that and what that means, or the expectations to that role, you're able to create a character that is believable quickly. When I watched Arcane, there's a character V, and she has this younger sister, Powder or Jinx. I immediately believed everything V said, everything V did, because I'm an older sister, and so that it made sense to me. So the archetype doesn't have to be something like, a soldier, a warrior, whatever. It could be an everyday role. If you look at a sister, a mother, a daughter, or a soldier, a doctor, a teacher, all these things have their own expectations. And you can also take this down and break things into parts. Say you've never been a soldier before. I can tell you being a soldier is a lot like being a janitor and being a teacher and being an older sibling with stupid. Yeah. Being an older sibling and being. I don't know, what else did I. Oh, of being an athlete. You're down at the suicide line, your coach is making you run again, someone missed the cutoff, so you have to go again, and you really just want to knock some sense into them, but they're your team, and that matters. And understanding that role that really anyone has been into, you can bring that over into this role that you haven't been in to create this sense of realism. And number 7 is that there are all types of people, virtues, and vices. So if you go online, there'll be these lists of traits. These are good traits, these are bad traits, these are what you can give your characters. And that's true to an extent. There is a sense where, love is better than cowardice. That's true. But there's still the sense that love can be wrong. It can be, if you direct your love towards an evil person, you're probably going to do bad things. If you direct your love to someone like a child, that is evil. So you can have this good thing that becomes evil because it's used wrongly. It's more difficult to take something like cowardice and say, oh, cowardice is good. It's not, but at least it can be advantageous. Cowardice, you run from a battle, congratulations, you're alive and everyone else is dead, which, has its own version of suckiness, but yeah, you're alive. There you go. But then also this virtues and vices, there's very different opinions on what is a virtue and what is a vice, or at least not on what is good and evil, but how to rank them. So you've got utilitarians, and those are people who say the ends justify the means. We're going to create the most happiness we can. There are people who are deontologists, and they're saying no, the ends do not justify the means. We're going to do what is right regardless of consequences. One major subgroup for deontologists are the divine command theory, which basically says we're going to do whatever God says. So whether you're Hindu, Muslim, Christian, your divine command theory is going to look different based on whatever it is your scriptures say and your God is saying. Then there's also the virtue ethics, and these are people who basically say wisdom is the best virtue. So we're going to cultivate multiple virtues, justice, discipline, courage, but it's all going to be tied together with wisdom, and we're going to do whatever is wisest at the time. Basically everything I was saying before about, this is right and this is wrong, depending on what it's directed to and all that, that is coming from a more Aristotelian, a more virtue ethics type mindset. And to have these different characters, one is going to resonate with different readers, because in real life we might not know the terms for this, but we all kind of dip in and out of these different spheres. It's also going to create, realistic tension within the characters. They're all more or less justified in what they're thinking, but they're going to conflict because they have these dissonant, very strongly held beliefs. You're also just going to treat themes and ideas more realistically and in a more even-handed manner. So you want to have these different people, these different virtues, these different vices, and have virtues and vices work in different ways. Number 8, you have that character improvement is slow. So Dante goes through the Inferno, and especially at the beginning, he's kind of lamenting and kind of not understanding why God is doing this. And in the narrative, it's treated as a flaw. And as he goes on, he kind of works his way out of this, but he still has this turning back. And so as he gets better, it's a very slow progress, and he'll take a few steps forward and then take a few steps back. And that's realistic. You don't, if you're trying to get off alcohol or something, you might have those relapses, and that doesn't mean you're doomed forever. It just means that it takes time and deliberation to change those habits. But I want to emphasize the words habits there, because habit is different than personality. What you do is kind of different than your intrinsic inclination. how you speak, how you think, that's similar, and it's going to come through in how you act, but it's not the same thing. So if you have a character and they're a bad guy and they're doing bad things, but then all of a sudden there's been some changes, some eruptions, and they're changing their mind, they're slowly working towards a healthier, better lifestyle, their whole entire personality isn't going to change. You don't want to do that to your characters because that feels like cheating. Your audience has, hated or loved to hate this character based on who you've established them to be. So even as you change their habits, a lot of their mannerisms, a lot of their dialogue, it's gonna sound like it's the same person. You want to distinguish between personality and habits. 9 is platonic friendships. So throughout this Divine Comedy, there's Dante talking about Beatrice, and he's talking about her as if she's the most beautiful woman in the world. And it's not any sort of sexual thing or anything like that. He's not looking to get anything out of her. It's because she's the personification of divine wisdom. And, how's that going to be ugly? So he doesn't want anything from her. And at the same time, he's speaking about Virgil, and he reveres him as a father. And it's not because he's afraid that if he doesn't kiss Dante or kiss Virgil's butt, he's going to get stuck in the Inferno. It's because he has this genuine appreciation and respect for him. And you don't want every single character to have this sort of relationship, but at the same time, this is one of the staples of fantasy. I mean, really, the Fellowship of the Ring is the book that starts modern day fantasy. It's the Fellowship of the Ring. And if there's any element of escapism in speculative fiction, it's here. Nobody wants to give up all their creature comforts. Nobody wants to suffer or, lose their leg, lose their life, whatever. But if you have this group of people around you, it becomes worth it, right? And so this is one aspect that is carried through to the modern day, and you really want it. It's one of the most popular tropes, this found family. And yes, it can seem cheesy, it has to be earned, but at the same time, it exists in real life. People just like each other, even bad people. And so if you, shy away from this because you don't want to come across as cheesy or false, you're cutting off something that is true in reality to try and make this imagined thing seem more realistic, and that doesn't make sense. So then lastly, there's this idea of the chiaroscuro. And this is an artistic term. It's kind of emphasizing the role of light and darkness. The darker the dark, the brighter the light, the brighter the light, the darker the dark, right? And so you start out in this inferno, and he's going deeper and deeper into hell. He's meeting these worse and worse people with these worse and worse punishments. His sympathy is drying up because he's seeing now that it's just the disgusting things that people have done, eating their own children and all that. It's rough. But because you have that darkness, then when you get to the Paradiso and you finally have this goodness, this light, it's not boring. It's not, get on with the story. It feels like it's a summit that's been climbed. It feels like something that's been earned. And throughout that darkness, you don't want to go totally dark. You want to have moments of humor or hope, because otherwise that tension, that conflict just becomes the status quo, and then it just becomes boring. But if you have those bright lights that go black again, then at the end, whether or not it stays black or you get a happier ending, it feels as if the story has been complete, has been told in such a way where anything could have happened. One note on this, though, is you want to pay attention to your reader's expectations and to the genres. I've read Anna Karenina. Anna is dead for about 70 pages, and Tolstoy just keeps talking about how great this guy that shares his name is, and there's no point. This book was over 50 pages ago. Just stop it. You always want your reader to be left with some room for the imagination. You want them to be more, curious about what you're going to do next, rather than them just saying, "Finish up already, Tolstoy." But I mean, I guess if you're being compared to Tolstoy, you've done something right. But anyway, those are the 10 takeaways from the Divine Comedy. This control of language, Be willing to say something. You don't need to explain everything. Personal significance within the epic scale. Repetition, used, properly. History, often through archetypes. Have all types of people, virtues, and vices. Character improvement is slow. There's backsliding. There's struggle. Just have some platonic friendships, some sort of no strings attached, real friendships, and then this chiaroscuro. You don't want, even if you're telling a story that's grimdark, you have to have some lights, some lighter moments, whether it's hope or humor or just something to create this contrast. That's all I have for now. I highly recommend the Divine Comedy. It's one of those classics that has actually earned its place as a classic. I like this translation too by Alan Mandelbaum. It doesn't have the terror sets all the time, but it is still a very poetic translation. And that's all for now. Hit like and subscribe.